In the city of lights, everyone wants to be the one standing in the center of the frame. They chase the applause, the awards, and the immortality of the screen. But for every person in the spotlight, there is a shadow. Someone who took the fall, hit the pavement, and disappeared before the credits rolled. My name is Ethan Liu. For 10 years, I was that shadow. I wasn't waiting for fame. I was waiting for the truth. And in this industry, the truth is the most dangerous role you can ever play. Welcome to the fiction verse. If you love deep, immersive audio novels, please take a quick second to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps this independent universe grow. Now, put on your favorite headphones, dim the lights, and let today's journey begin. The alarm clock didn't so much ring as it did threaten. It was a sharp, mechanical rattle that cut through the silence of the 5 in the morning darkness, vibrating against the cheap wood of the nightstand. Ethan Liu's eyes snapped open instantly. There was no groaning, no reaching for a snooze button, and certainly no lingering under the warmth of the quilt. He simply sat up. The air in the tiny apartment was crisp, bordering on cold, which was exactly how he liked it. Kept his mind sharp. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, letting his internal systems boot up. In the faint blue light filtering through the thin curtains from the street lamps outside, his room looked like a museum of a life on hold. It was barely 10 feet wide. A single bed, a small desk, and a kitchen area that was essentially a hot plate and a sink. But it was the far wall that drew the eye. It was covered in a massive corkboard, organized with the kind of precision that would make a forensic investigator proud. There were audition notices from 2018, 2019, 2021. Faded slips of paper representing hundreds of hours of preparation for roles that ultimately went to someone with a more marketable face. 4 years of earning a Bachelor of Performing Arts had taught him how to build believable characters. The following 4 years had taught him something far less inspiring. Talent could get you into an audition room. Marketability decided who walked out with the contract. There were character sketches he'd drawn himself, trying to visualize the psychology of a minor thief or a silent bodyguard. And in the very center, pinned with a single red tack, was a handwritten note. Become the actor every story deserves. Not today, shoulder, Ethan muttered to himself, feeling the familiar, dull ache in his right rotator cuff. It was a souvenir from a stunt 3 years ago when a harness had snapped a fraction of a second too late. He stood up and moved to the small patch of open floor space. His morning routine was a ritual. He started with slow, deliberate stretches, feeling every muscle fiber protest before finally yielding. He moved into his martial arts drills, not the flashy, cinematic kind used for the cameras, but the grounded, traditional forms he'd practiced since he was 8 years old. The sound of his breathing filled the room. Inhale, exhale, snap. His fist cut through the air with a distinct whistle. He wasn't thinking about being a star. He was thinking about the weight of a punch, the way a man's center of gravity shifts when he's afraid, and the way a professional never shows more than he needs to. After the physical work came the mental. He sat at the small desk, cracking open a worn, leather-bound notebook. It was his most prized possession. Inside, he had logged every single audition he had ever attended. He flipped to a page marked January 14th. Role: background thug. Result: rejected. Feedback: too focused. Director wanted someone more clumsy. He chuckled softly, a dry, self-deprecating sound. He picked up his pen and wrote today's date. Underneath, he added his daily mantra. Make one scene more truthful than yesterday. Sometimes he remembered graduation. One of his professors had looked at him after the final showcase and said, "You're the strongest actor in this class." Ethan had smiled. Then the professor had sighed. I only wish talent were the only thing this industry rewarded. Back then, Ethan hadn't fully understood. 8 years later, he understood perfectly. He was currently studying for a bit part, a nameless security guard in a mid-budget thriller. He had exactly 3 lines. Most actors would just memorize them and show up. Ethan had spent 3 days deciding what kind of breakfast that guard would have eaten. Was he a man who liked his coffee black? Did he have a daughter at home who didn't want him working the night shift? He began to recite the lines, his voice low and steady. The exit is to your left, sir. Please move along. He said it again, but this time, he let his eyes wander, showing the slight boredom of a man who had said that sentence 1,000 times that night. He said it a third time, but added a flicker of alertness, the guard noticing a bulge in the visitor's pocket. Thud, thud, thud. A heavy fist pounded on the wall from the adjacent apartment. Lou, for the love of everything, it is 5:45. A muffled voice screamed. Are you arresting someone in there again? Ethan stopped mid-sentence, a small, sheepish smile tugging at his lips. He walked over to the wall and raised his voice just enough to be heard. Sorry, Mr. Henderson. The character was just being diligent. The character needs to get a job at a library, the neighbor yelled back. Ethan sighed and started packing his bag. He tucked his notebook into the side pocket, right next to a small container of rice and vegetables he'd prepped the night before. Eating out was a luxury he couldn't afford, not if he wanted to keep paying his acting coach. As he stepped out into the hallway, the door to the next apartment creaked open. Mr. Henderson, an elderly man in a moth-eaten bathrobe, peered out. You're going to that studio again? Henderson asked, leaning on his cane. Call time is 7, sir, Ethan replied, offering a respectful bow. Henderson grunted, looking him up and down. You look like a man who fixes things. Plumber, maybe, or a carpenter. Why you want to be in the make-believe business is beyond me. You got too much reality in your face, kid. Ethan smiled. It was the first genuine smile of the day. That's the best compliment anyone's given me all week, Mr. Henderson. Yeah. Just don't wake me up tomorrow. If I hear you directing traffic in your sleep again, I'm calling the landlord. Understood. Have a good day, sir. The commute to the studio involved 2 bus transfers and a 20-minute walk through an industrial district that smelled of diesel and wet concrete. By the time Ethan reached the Starbright Studios gate, he was already sweating through his hoodie. He didn't head for the main entrance where the actors in their tinted window SUVs were being ushered in. He went to the side gate, the staff and stunt entrance. Morning, Lou, the guard said, barely glancing up from his clipboard. Gym's open. Mason's already in there trying to break the bouldering record. Thanks, Jerry. The training gym was a cavernous space filled with the smell of old sweat and high-density foam. At the far end, a man with shoulders the size of a linebacker was hanging off a wooden ledge by his fingertips. Mason Huang dropped from the climbing wall with practiced ease. Ethan had met him 8 years earlier while earning his stunt certification alongside acting school. Back then Mason had already been one of the academy's best trainees, while Ethan was the stubborn 18-year-old who refused to go home until he landed every fall correctly. Somewhere between bruises, broken practice weapons, and too many convenience store dinners after training, they had become brothers in everything except blood. Mason wiped his chalky hands on his gym shorts and grinned when he saw Ethan. You're late, Mason said, checking the clock on the wall. By 4 minutes. I was about to assume you'd finally been kidnapped by a talent scout. My neighbor had a few notes on my projection, Ethan replied, dropping his bag and heading for the pull-up bar. Mason's grin faded as he watched Ethan begin his warm-up. He noticed the way Ethan winced almost imperceptibly when he reached full extension. Shoulder again? It's fine, Ethan said quickly. It's not fine. You're doing a high fall today, Ethan. If that shoulder locks up midair, you're not going to be an actor. You're going to be a cautionary tale for the new recruits. Mason walked over, his expression protective. I don't get you. You've spent almost 8 years chasing this dream. 4 years studying acting. 5 years doing stunts. Countless auditions. You're still here. You're the best technician we have. The coordinators literally use your footage to teach the new guys. Why are you still taking these tiny speaking roles that pay less than the stunts? Ethan finished his set and dropped down, his feet silent on the mat. Because if I stay a technician, I'll always be a tool for someone else's story. I want to be the story, Mason. Then ask Ryan for a leg up, Mason argued. He's the nation's sweetheart now. He's got more clout than the directors. One word from him and you're in a lead role. Ethan's gaze turned distant, his voice taking on a quiet, stubborn edge. I love Ryan like a brother. He deserves everything he has. But if I can't get into that room on my own merit, then I don't belong there. I don't want a favor, Mason. I want a fair fight. Mason understood. Ethan had refused shortcuts since acting school. Even when professors quietly introduced promising students to casting directors, Ethan insisted on attending the same public auditions as everyone else. If I earn it, he used to say, I'll never have to wonder whether I deserved it. Mason shook his head. You're an idiot. A talented, stubborn idiot. Come on, let's run the choreography for the hallway scene. I heard the lead actor wants to try doing his own stunts today, which usually means we spend 4 hours making sure he doesn't punch himself in the face. The set of the movie Silent City was a chaotic symphony of shouting assistant directors, rolling camera dollies, and the constant hiss of hairspray. The lead actor, a man named Tyler who was currently the face of 3 different luxury watch brands, was standing in the center of the set. He was surrounded by a small army, 2 makeup artists dabbing at his forehead, an assistant holding a straw to his lips, and a publicist whispering into his ear about his next social media post. Ethan stood off to the side with the other 5 security guards. He was dressed in a stiff, ill-fitting polyester uniform. He looked exactly like a man who was paid to be ignored. Okay, everyone, places. The director, a high-strung man with a megaphone, shouted. Tyler, remember, you're supposed to look rugged, but vulnerable. Security guards, stay in the blur. Don't look at the lens. The cameras began to roll. Tyler delivered his lines, a dramatic speech about justice and sacrifice. His voice was polished, his expressions perfectly practiced for the best angles. Great, beautiful. We'll fix the timing in post. The director cheered. The crew clapped. Tyler beamed, checking his reflection in a handheld mirror. Cut. Reset for the window break. Lou, you're up. The atmosphere changed instantly. The actors moved back to their trailers, and the workers stepped forward. Ethan climbed the scaffolding to a platform 2 stories up. Below him was a window made of breakaway sugar glass and a hard landing mat covered in thin carpet to make it look like a concrete floor. The stunt coordinator checked the tension on Ethan's harness. It's a blind dive, Ethan. You have to twist midair to clear the frame. If you're too slow, the camera catches your face. If you're too fast, you hit the edge of the mat. I know the math, Ethan said softly. He closed his eyes, mentally mapping the distance. He wasn't thinking about the danger. He was thinking about how a man would fall if he had just been betrayed. It wouldn't be a graceful dive. It would be a desperate, ugly scramble for life. Rolling. Action. Ethan dived. It was a blur of motion. He hit the glass, and the sound of the explosion was deafening in the enclosed set. Shards of glass rained down like diamonds. In midair, Ethan performed a sharp, violent twist, his body contorting in a way that looked agonizingly real. He hit the mat with a heavy thwack that echoed off the studio walls. Cut. That's a wrap on the exterior. The director was already looking at his watch, calling for his assistant to bring his car around. The crew immediately began moving cables and breaking down the lights. Nobody asked Ethan if he was okay. Nobody checked to see if the glass had scratched his skin. He was just a body that had hit the mark. As Ethan unbuckled his harness, a young production assistant, a kid who looked like he'd started yesterday, walked past and began to clap. The veteran stunt coordinator reached out and grabbed the kid's arm, pulling him back. What are you doing? That was amazing, the kid whispered. He looked like he actually died. The coordinator looked at Ethan, who was already on his knees, helping the crew pack up the heavy crash mats without being asked. Ethan was sweating, a small cut bleeding on his cheek, but his face was perfectly neutral. We don't clap for the fall, the coordinator said firmly to the assistant. We clap when everyone goes home safely. Now get a broom and help Lou. He's doing your job for you. Ethan didn't hear the exchange. He was focused on the work. He moved from the mats to the lighting trucks, lifting heavy crates of gear. He didn't do it to be a martyr. He did it because the silence of the set after a shoot always made him feel a strange, hollow ache. Helping the crew made him feel like he was part of something, even if his name would never appear in the credits. The lead actor, Tyler, walked past him on his way to his SUV. He was laughing at something on his phone. He glanced at Ethan for a split second, a nameless guy in a sweaty uniform, and offered a distracted nod. "Good job today, Guard B," Tyler said, not even breaking his stride. "Thank you, sir," Ethan replied, offering a polite bow. The SUV doors slammed shut, and the tinted windows rolled up, sealing the stars away from the workers. Ethan picked up his bag and felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He pulled it out, his breath catching in his throat. 8 years. 8 years of classes, stunt work, background roles, body doubles, tiny speaking parts, hundreds of auditions. Maybe, just maybe, this one would finally matter. Casting notification. Shadowline. Status. Audition confirmed. Role, detective's assistant. Time? Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Ethan stared at the screen until the light dimmed. This wasn't just a bit part. This was a character with a name. A character who mattered. This was the door he had been waiting for. He walked to the call sheet board near the exit and checked tomorrow's schedule. His name was there, tucked away at the very bottom of the stunt list. Ethan Liu, stunt double, Tyler. He took a pen from his bag and checked the box next to his name. Tomorrow he would report for the stunts at 5 a.m. He would work until 8:30 a.m. Then he would change out of his gear, wash the sweat off his face in a public restroom, and walk into that audition room as an actor. 2 lives. One day, as he walked out of the studio gates, the first rain of the evening began to fall, turning the pavement into a mirror. He looked back at the massive sound stages, now glowing like islands in the dark. He tightened his grip on the strap of his bag and disappeared into the rain-soaked street. And this time, he wouldn't let anyone look past him. The sign for the Noodle Nook was missing the letter N. So it just glowed the Oodle OK in a soft, flickering orange against the rain-slicked pavement. It was a tiny, basement-level restaurant tucked away in an alley that the city's modernization had somehow forgotten. For 10 years, it had been the sanctuary for 2 boys with nothing but scripts in their bags and dreams that were too big for their bank accounts. Ethan pushed the door open, feeling the immediate blast of humid air smelling of ginger, garlic, and slow-simmered beef broth. "Table 4 is waiting, Ethan," Mrs. Gable called out from behind a mountain of steam. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The bell had a specific rattle when Ethan Liu opened the door. "Spicy beef, no green onions for the star, and extra chili oil for the stuntman, right?" Ethan laughed, pulling off his damp hoodie. "You have a scary memory, Mrs. Gable." "It's not memory, it's routine," she grunted, though her eyes were kind. "Sit. He's running late again." Ethan slid into the worn vinyl booth. The springs in the seat groaned, a sound he'd known since he was 19. He pulled his acting notebook out and laid it on the scratched laminate table. He began to review his notes for the Shadowline audition, but his mind kept drifting to the hallway fall he'd done earlier. He was mentally checking his body, knees were okay, but his ribs felt a bit tight. 10 minutes later, the door swung open with a flourish that seemed to command the attention of everyone in the room. Even in a damp alleyway restaurant, Ryan Zhao knew how to make an entrance. He was wearing a camel-colored wool coat that probably cost more than Ethan's entire wardrobe, and his hair was styled in that perfectly messy look that took 2 hours to achieve. He spotted Ethan and his face broke into a wide, boyish grin. The same grin that had made him the nation's sweetheart in under 3 years. "Lou, tell me you haven't started without me," Ryan said, sliding into the booth. He smelled of expensive cologne and studio hairspray. He looked around the tiny shop and sighed contentedly. "Man, I needed this. My manager wanted me to go to a networking dinner with some tech investors, but I told her I had a prior creative consultation, which technically this is." Ethan smiled, closing his notebook. "You look exhausted, Ryan. Tough day." Ryan threw his head back, draping his arms over the back of the booth. "You have no idea. We're filming the finale of Summer Heartbeat. I had to cry for 6 hours straight. The director kept saying, Ryan, give me more heartbreak. Imagine your puppy just told you he doesn't love you. By the 4th hour, I was just crying because my eyes were stinging from the fake rain. But you got the shot? Ethan asked. Oh, I killed it, Ryan said, his eyes sparking with that familiar, hungry light. The crew was actually misty-eyed. But honestly, I felt like a fraud. I was just hitting the marks, Ethan. I wasn't in it. Not like you would have been. Ryan leaned forward, his expression becoming intensely sincere. He reached out and tapped the cover of Ethan's notebook. I mean it, man. Every time I'm on set and I'm struggling, I think, what would Ethan do? I've been riding your coattails since acting school. Ethan felt a warm swell of gratitude. It was easy to feel invisible in this industry, but having the biggest star in the country speak to you like you were his mentor was a powerful drug. We met 10 years ago in that drafty rehearsal room, Ryan. You don't owe me anything. You worked hard for those awards. Did I? Ryan asked, his voice dropping to a whisper as Mrs. Gable set 2 steaming bowls of noodles in front of them. Remember that first improv exercise? The broken vase scene? I stood there like a mannequin. I forgot my name, let alone my lines. And you just stepped in. You played the angry father so well I actually got scared, and it forced me to react. You carried me then, and sometimes it feels like I'm still just reacting to the ghost of your talent. Ethan picked up his chopsticks, embarrassed by the praise. You have a gift for the camera, Ryan. People love you. They see themselves in you. Maybe, Ryan said, taking a bite of his noodles and immediately wincing at the heat. But they see a character. I want them to see what I see when I watch you. Speaking of, I heard a rumor through the grapevine. Is it true? Jonathan Sue is actually letting you in the room for Shadowline. Ethan's hand paused over his bowl. How did you know about that? I only got the confirmation an hour ago. Ryan's eyes flickered, a brief, microscopic hesitation, before he gave a casual shrug. Marcus handles my schedule, but he's always eavesdropping on the other producers. I told him if your name came up, he had to tell me. I was so worried you wouldn't get the invite. You deserve this, Ethan. More than anyone. It's just an audition, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the excitement thumping in his chest. I still have to earn the role. You'll earn it, Ryan said firmly. He leaned in closer. Hey, do you have the self-tape you sent them? Or your notes? I'm actually up for a similar role in a different project next month. A gritty detective type. I'm terrified I'm going to look like a kid playing dress-up. I want to see how a real actor prepares for it. Ethan hesitated. His notebook and his tapes were private. They were his process, his soul laid bare on paper. But he looked at Ryan. He saw the friend who had paid his electricity bill when he was out of work for 3 months. He saw the friend who still came to this greasy noodle shop even though he could afford a 5-star chef. Of course, Ethan said, reaching for his bag. He pulled out a small tablet and unlocked it. I went for something a bit different. Most people play the detective's assistant as a sidekick. I played him as the smartest person in the room who's pretending to be a sidekick so he doesn't get targeted. He pressed play on a video. On the screen, Ethan was sitting in his kitchen. The lighting was poor, but the moment the scene started, the room seemed to vanish. Ethan didn't use big gestures. He used his eyes. He used the way he held a pen. He spoke a line about a missing witness, and there was such a subtle layer of grief under the professional tone that even Ryan stopped breathing for a second. Ryan watched the 3-minute clip in absolute silence. When it ended, he didn't hand the tablet back right away. He stared at the frozen frame of Ethan's face. That's... Ryan started, then stopped. He cleared his throat. That's intimidatingly good, Lou. Seriously. The way you used the silence between the lines. It's like you were inviting the audience to read your mind. I think the audience is smarter than we give them credit for, Ethan said. They don't need to be told how to feel. They want to discover it. Can I keep a copy of this? Ryan asked. Just to study? I won't show anyone, obviously. I just want to break down your timing. It's light years ahead of mine. Ethan felt a tiny prickle of unease, but he quickly suppressed it. This is Ryan, he reminded himself. Your best friend. Don't be stingy. Sure, Ethan said. I'll airdrop it to you. The rest of the dinner was filled with laughter. Ryan told stories about a co-star who couldn't remember her own name, and Ethan told him about the production assistant who almost clapped for a dangerous fall. For a few hours, the gap between the superstar and the stuntman didn't exist. They were just two kids from acting school sharing a dream. When the bill came, Ethan tried to reach for it, but Ryan was faster. I told you, Ryan said, waving the check. You buy when you're famous. And after that audition tomorrow, I have a feeling I'm going to be eating a lot of expensive steaks on your dime. They walked out into the cool evening air. The rain had stopped, leaving the city smelling of wet stone and ozone. They stopped at the corner where they usually parted ways. Good luck tomorrow, Ethan, Ryan said, his voice unusually soft. He reached out and gripped Ethan's shoulder. Really, go in there and show them who you are. Don't hold back. I won't, Ethan promised. Thanks for the noodles, Ryan, and for everything. Always, man, always. Ethan watched as Ryan walked toward a waiting black car. He saw the way the driver opened the door, the way Ryan's posture changed the moment he was near the public eye, the shoulders squaring, the chin lifting. Ethan turned and started his walk toward the subway. He felt a profound sense of luck. The acting world was a lonely place, a place where people stepped over each other to reach the light. But he had a friend who truly believed in him. He had someone who saw his talent even when the world didn't. He reached into his bag and touched the worn cover of his notebook. He felt ready. Neither of them knew, as the city lights blurred around them, that this was the last night they would ever sit in that booth as friends. As the train doors slid shut, Ethan rested a hand on the worn notebook in his bag. A small smile found its way onto his face before the train carried him into the night. If hope were a physical weight, Ethan Liu would have been crushed by it years ago. Instead, it was more like a slow-acting poison, sweet at first, but leaving a bitter aftertaste that lingered for months. In the entertainment industry, people talk about the big break, as if it's a sudden lightning strike. They don't talk about the heat lightning, the flashes that brighten the sky for a split second, making you think the storm is coming, only to leave you in deeper darkness than before. For 3 years, Ethan lived in that flickering light. The first almost happened 14 months into his friendship with Ryan. Ethan had been offered an audition for a gritty police procedural called The Last Witness. It wasn't a lead, but it was a recurring supporting role, a cynical forensics expert. For 3 weeks, Ethan turned his apartment into a crime lab. He bought textbooks on blood spatter patterns. He spent his lunch breaks sitting outside the city morgue, watching how the coroners walked when they came out for a smoke, the specific way their shoulders slumped from the weight of what they saw every day. The audition room was small and smelled of stale coffee. Behind the table sat a casting director named Sarah, who looked like she had seen 10,000 actors that day and hated every single one of them. Ethan didn't try to act. He walked in, sat down, and looked at the script as if it were a puzzle he was tired of solving. He delivered the lines with a clinical, detached precision that was interrupted only by a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand when he mentioned the victim's age. When he finished, the room was silent. Sarah actually took off her glasses. "You're not playing him as a hero," she said, her voice sounding surprised. "He's seen too many bodies to be a hero," Ethan replied simply. "He's just a man trying to make the world make sense." Sarah nodded slowly. "You found something even we didn't write, Mr. Liu. That was exceptional. We'll be in touch." Ethan floated home. He felt it in his bones. This was the one. He called Ryan that night, his voice thick with rare excitement. "Ryan, I think I did it. The casting director. She actually looked awake when I was done." "That's my man." Ryan's voice boomed over the speaker, accompanied by the sound of a hairdryer in the background. "I told you. You're finally getting out of the stunt suit. Let's grab a drink when I'm back from the fashion shoot in Shanghai." 2 weeks passed. Ethan checked his phone so often he started imagining the vibration. Then the announcement hit the trades. Rising star Ryan Zhao cast as recurring lead in The Last Witness. Ethan stared at the screen. Ryan hadn't mentioned he was auditioning for that show. In fact, Ryan had told him he was too busy with a historical epic. The phone rang. It was Ryan. "Ethan, man, you're not going to believe this." Ryan sounded breathless, almost guilty. "The producers of Witness called my manager. They said they saw my reel and wanted me for a new lead role they created. I didn't even audition. I swear. I feel terrible. I know you wanted that show." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. He looked at his forensics textbooks. "Don't feel bad, Ryan. A lead role is a huge step up. They probably needed your name to get the green light. I'm happy for you. You're the best, Lou. Seriously. I'll make it up to you, I promise." That night, Ethan opened his notebook. He didn't write about the betrayal he didn't yet recognize. He wrote, "Need more restraint. Less technique. More life." By the second year, Ryan was a household name, and Ethan was the most requested stuntman in the city. He had started developing a unique style, movement acting. He believed that a fight scene should tell you as much about a character's soul as a monologue. He spent months choreographing a sequence for a potential role in an action thriller called The Silent Edge. He filled his notebook with sketches of footwork, the way a man would punch if he were protecting a child versus a man punching for revenge. One evening, Ryan came over to Ethan's apartment. He brought expensive takeout and a bottle of wine that cost more than Ethan's monthly grocery budget. "I'm stuck, Ethan," Ryan said, tossing his jacket onto the bed. "I've got this fight scene next week, and the coordinator is a hack. It's all punch, kick, move. There's no fire in it. No story." Ethan, always eager to help, opened his notebook. "Look at this. I've been working on a concept. Instead of a standard brawl, imagine the character is terrified. He's not a fighter, he's a survivor. Every move is defensive, using the environment, chairs, walls, even his own jacket, to create distance." Ryan's eyes lit up as he scanned the sketches. He spent the next 3 hours asking Ethan to demonstrate. He even recorded Ethan on his phone for reference. "You're a genius, Lou," Ryan said, hugging him before he left. "This is going to save my career." 6 weeks later, the first trailer for Ryan's new movie, Concrete Jungle, dropped. Ethan watched it on his break. The centerpiece of the trailer was a 3-minute fight in a narrow kitchen. It was Ethan's choreography, move for move. Even the specific way the character used a pot lid to parry a knife strike, a detail Ethan had agonized over for days, was there. Mason, sitting next to him, spat out his coffee. "Lou, isn't that the survivor concept you were showing me last month?" Ethan watched the screen, his heart pounding a strange, erratic rhythm. It's similar." "Similar?" "Ethan, that's an exact copy. Did he pay you for that? Did you get a consultant credit?" Ethan felt a cold chill. "He's my friend, Mason." He was struggling. "I'm just glad he could use it." "He didn't use it, Ethan," Mason growled. "He took it." But Ethan didn't want to hear it. He couldn't afford to hear it. If Ryan wasn't his friend, then Ethan was truly alone in a world that didn't want him. He went back to work, but for the first time he didn't help the crew pack up. He just walked to the subway in silence. The third year brought the biggest opportunity of Ethan's life. A European director, famous for his avant-garde thrillers, was holding a global search for an Asian lead. The role was a man who had lost his speech due to trauma and had to communicate entirely through action and expression. It was the role Ethan had been born for. He submitted his tape through a public portal since he still didn't have an agent. He didn't tell Ryan. Not out of suspicion, but because he wanted to surprise him. He wanted to walk into the Noodle Nook and say, "I'm going to Paris, Ryan. I finally made it." 5 days after his submission, he received a notification that his tape had been viewed. 3 hours after that, his phone buzzed. From Casting Paris. Subject: Confirmation of withdrawal. "Dear Mr. Liu, we have received your request to withdraw from the selection process for The Silent Sun. We respect your decision to focus on your current domestic commitments and wish you luck. Ethan stared at the screen. The words blurred. He read it again and again. Withdrawal? He whispered. I didn't send anything. He frantically tried to log into the portal, but his password had been changed. He tried to email the director's office, but the auto-reply stated that the casting phase was closed and no further communications would be read. He sat on his bed, the silence of the room feeling like a vacuum, sucking the air out of his lungs. His laptop was sitting on the desk. He opened it and checked his browser history. There, in the logs from 2 days ago, was the portal login. 2 days ago. The day Ryan had come over because his AC was broken, and he needed a place to work on his script, while Ethan was at the gym. Ethan's hand went to his throat. He felt like he was choking. No, not Ryan. He wouldn't. He's the one who pays my bills. He's the one who tells me I'm better than him. He called Ryan, his voice trembling. Ryan, something happened. I got a withdrawal email for the Paris project. I think I got hacked. Paris. Ryan's voice was smooth, like silk over a blade. Oh, the silent roll? Ethan, I saw that. I was actually going to tell you. I heard the director is a nightmare. He's known for being verbally abusive to newcomers. Honestly, man, maybe it's a blessing in disguise? You're so sensitive. A guy like that would break you. But I didn't withdraw, Ryan, Ethan said, a single tear finally escaping. I wanted that role more than anything. I know, Ryan cooed. Look, it's probably just a glitch in their system. Or maybe someone in the industry is jealous of you. You've got a lot of enemies among the other stunt guys, Lou. You're too good and they know it. Don't let it get you down. I've got a meeting with a producer tomorrow. I'll see if I can slide your name into the conversation. Ethan hung up. He wanted to believe him. He needed to believe him, because the alternative was a truth too terrifying to face. That his best friend wasn't the wind beneath his wings, but the anchor dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. He picked up his notebook and turned to the back, to a blank page. He didn't write about acting. He didn't write about truth. He wrote, keep preparing. The next room might be the right one. He closed the book and tucked it into his bag. He had work at 5 a.m. He had to fall off a building for a movie he'd never see. As he turned off the light, the flickering neon sign from across the street cast a long, jagged shadow across his wall. It looked like a person reaching out, but whether it was to help him up or pull him down, Ethan could no longer tell. He closed the notebook and switched off the light. The room fell silent. The air in the VIP lounge of the international airport was filtered, chilled to exactly 68 degrees, and smelled faintly of expensive sandalwood and unspoken power. Ryan Zhao sat in a plush velvet armchair, his eyes hidden behind a pair of oversized designer sunglasses. To anyone glancing through the frosted glass partitions, he looked like a masterpiece in repose. His skin was flawless, thanks to a 3-step hydration mask his assistant had applied at 4 in the morning, and his posture was perfectly calculated to look relaxed yet unattainable. Outside the lounge, a muffled roar vibrated through the walls. It was the sound of 300 teenage girls, members of the Sweethearts fan club, who had been waiting for 6 hours just to see him walk from the check-in desk to the gate. They're getting loud, Olivia Fong, Ryan's manager, said without looking up from her tablet. Her thumb flicked rhythmically, approving social media posts and deleting any comment that didn't fit the perfect gentleman narrative. We'll send you out in 5 minutes. Remember, wave. Don't stop to sign anything. We're behind schedule. And make sure you look slightly tired but appreciative. The hardworking star angle is trending this week. Ryan let out a long, slow breath. I actually am tired, Olivia. I don't think I need to act that part. Olivia finally looked at him, her eyes sharp and clinical. You're not just Ryan Zhao anymore. You're a multi-million-dollar investment. If that investment looks exhausted because he was out partying, it's a disaster. If he looks exhausted because he's dedicating his soul to his craft, it's a profit margin. Learn the difference. Ryan adjusted his sunglasses. He thought about Ethan. He wondered if Ethan was awake yet. Probably. Ethan was always awake. A flicker of something that felt like guilt, but looked like a headache, crossed his face. He pushed it down. Ethan has talent, Ryan reminded himself, but I have the responsibility of being the one who actually made it. I'm doing this for both of us. Eventually. Ready? Olivia asked, standing up. Ryan stood, smoothing the invisible wrinkles in his coat. He checked his reflection in the darkened screen of his phone. The mask was on. The nation's sweetheart was ready for his public. Let's go, he said, his voice dropping into that smooth, confident register the world loved. 200 miles away, the air was not chilled, and it certainly didn't smell like sandalwood. Ethan Liu sat on a rusted equipment crate in the corner of an abandoned textile factory that had been converted into a set for a low-budget crime thriller. The air was thick with the smell of old grease, gunpowder from the blanks used in the morning shoot, and the persistent, choking dust of a building that had been neglected for 30 years. He was dressed in a tattered, oil-stained mechanic's jumpsuit. His face was covered in a mixture of actual sweat and high-definition grime makeup. He looked like a man who had just spent 10 hours under a car, which was exactly the role he was playing. Mechanic number 2. He was holding a cardboard container of lukewarm noodles, the kind you buy at a convenience store when you've realized you missed the studio catering window because you were too busy double-checking the safety rig for the lead actor's jump. Is this seat taken? Ethan looked up. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20, was standing there holding a plastic bottle of water. She was wearing a similar jumpsuit, though hers looked much cleaner than his. It's a crate, not a throne, Ethan said, sliding over to give her space. Help yourself. The girl sat down with a groan. I thought acting was going to be glamorous. I've spent 4 hours standing in a dark hallway waiting for someone to yell action. And when they finally did, I got told my left elbow was too distracting, and they cut my only line. Ethan offered a small, empathetic smile. Welcome to the industry. The first 5 years are basically just learning how to be part of the scenery. You seem like you've been doing this a while, the girl said, looking at the way Ethan sat. Perfectly balanced, his energy contained. Are you a regular? Stunt team mostly, Ethan said, taking a bite of his noodles. I have 2 lines in this one. I tell the hero that the brakes are cut. Hey, that's a plot point, she chirped. I'm just girl in background. My mom is going to have to pause the frame just to see my ear. She looked at a magazine sticking out of Ethan's open bag. On the cover, Ryan Zhao was looking intensely into the camera. Oh wow, did you see his latest interview? Ryan Zhao is he's something else, isn't he? They say he does all his own character research, that he actually spent a week living in a shelter just to understand his role in the Silent Street. Ethan stared at the magazine cover. He remembered that week. Ryan hadn't lived in a shelter. He'd stayed in Ethan's apartment because he'd had a minor breakout on his forehead and didn't want his manager to see it. Ethan had spent that entire week reading him stories he'd collected from the people he met while working odd jobs. He's very dedicated, Ethan said quietly. He's a genius, the girl insisted. I wish I had half his natural instinct. Some people are just born for the spotlight, you know? They just have that spark. Ethan looked at his hands. They were calloused, the knuckles scarred from years of hitting mats and concrete. He thought about the notebook in his bag, filled with 3,000 days of observations, failures, and lessons. Maybe, Ethan said, but even a spark needs someone to build the fire. Whatever, the girl laughed, not really listening. I'd give anything just to be in the same room as him. Imagine having a friend like that. Someone who could just pull you up with them. Ethan didn't answer. He finished his noodles and stood up. Break's over. They're resetting the hallway. Good luck with your ears debut. Ethan got home at 11:30 that night. His legs felt like lead, and his right shoulder was screaming in a high-pitched frequency that usually meant he'd be reaching for the ice pack. He didn't turn on the main light. He preferred the soft, amber glow of his desk lamp. It made the room feel smaller, more manageable. He sat down and pulled a large, thick folder from under his bed. This wasn't his acting notebook. This was his history folder. Inside were hundreds of clippings. Newspaper snippets, magazine pages, printed blog posts. All of them featured Ryan Zhao. He picked up a pair of scissors and carefully cut out the cover of the magazine he'd bought at the studio. He pasted it onto a fresh page. He wasn't doing it out of obsession. He was doing it because he needed to believe that the 10 years weren't a waste. If Ryan succeeded, it meant the things Ethan taught him were right. It meant the style they had developed together worked. If Ryan was the proof, then Ethan wasn't a failure. He was just waiting for his turn. A sharp knock at the door startled him. He didn't even have to ask who it was. The rhythmic, heavy thud was unmistakable. Ethan opened the door to find Mason standing there, still wearing his gym tank top despite the late hour. He was carrying a bag of spicy skewers and 2 cans of cheap beer. "I saw your light on," Mason said, pushing past him. "You look like you died 3 hours ago and forgot to lie down." "Tough shoot," Ethan said, closing the door. "Lots of resets." Mason dropped the food on the table and froze. He looked at the open folder, the scissors, and the magazine cover of Ryan Zhao. He slowly looked up at Ethan, his expression a mixture of pity and genuine annoyance. "You're still doing it," Mason said, his voice flat. "It's just a record, Mason. For the future." "The future?" Mason barked a laugh, cracking open a beer and handing it to Ethan. "Ethan, look at this room. You're 26 years old. You're the best actor I've ever seen. And I spend all day watching professionals miss their marks. You live in a place that's basically a closet. You eat noodles that cost less than a bus fare. And you spend your nights making a scrapbook for a guy who hasn't called you in 3 weeks. He's busy, Mason. He's in Europe for the film festival. He's not too busy to post a picture of his spontaneous breakfast in Rome on Instagram." Mason slammed his hand on the table, making the scissors jump. "I don't understand you. You're smiling. Your best friend stole your choreography, he stole your roles, he probably stole your dignity. And you're sitting here acting like his proud older brother." Ethan took a long sip of the beer. The cold liquid stung his throat. "He didn't steal them, Mason. He took opportunities that I wasn't ready for. That's what the industry told me. Ryan is just the one who could make them work. Because he used your brain to do it." Mason leaned in, his voice dropping. "I was there, Ethan. I saw you stay up until 3 a.m. helping him memorize the subtext for The Last Witness. I saw you give him that fight concept. And then I saw the credits. Your name wasn't there. Not even as a thank you." Ethan looked at the scrapbook. He looked at Ryan's smiling face. "If I start being bitter, Mason, if I start believing that he's my enemy, then I've already lost. If I hate him, then the last 10 years were a mistake. I can't afford for them to be a mistake." Mason sighed, all the anger draining out of him, replaced by a heavy, somber silence. He reached out and ruffled Ethan's messy hair. "You're a terrifying person, you know that? Most people break. You just become more solid. Like a diamond. But even diamonds can be crushed if you put enough weight on them." "I'm not crushed yet," Ethan said, a ghost of his usual smile appearing. "I have an audition tomorrow. A real one. Jonathan Sue." Mason's eyes widened. "The butcher of actors? The guy who once made a lead actress cry for 2 days because she blinked wrong. That's the one." "Well," Mason said, raising his beer can, "if anyone can survive a butcher, it's a guy who's been hitting the pavement for a living." "To the audition." "To the audition," Ethan echoed. That night, after Mason left, Ethan sat at his window. The city was a grid of light, millions of people living millions of different stories. He pulled out his notebook, the one for himself, not the scrapbook. He turned to a new page. He didn't write about a character. He didn't write about a technique. He wrote, "The brightest light still needs something to shine against. Tomorrow I'll stand in my own place." He closed the book. He looked at the scrapbook of Ryan Zhao sitting on his desk. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to check if the glue was dry. He just felt finished. He lay down in his small bed, his body aching, his mind already racing toward the morning. He thought about the red carpet Ryan was probably walking on right now. He thought about the flashing cameras and the screaming fans. He didn't want any of it. He just wanted the room, the silence, the camera lens, and the chance to finally, truly be seen. As he drifted off to sleep, he didn't dream of awards or billboards. He dreamed of a single line of dialogue, spoken in a voice that finally sounded like his own. "I'm here," he whispered into the darkness of the room. "I've always been here." The alarm was set for 5 a.m. The air in Ethan's apartment was thick with the metallic scent of copper and the sharp, clinical sting of rubbing alcohol. He sat on the floor, his back against the small refrigerator, his shirt off as he pressed a cold compress against his ribs. On the table in front of him sat the script for Shadowline. The pages were already beginning to curl at the edges, dog-eared and stained with coffee rings. "Leon," Ethan whispered, the name of the character tasting like smoke in his mouth. "A man who survives because he's already lost everything. He doesn't fight to win. He fights because he forgot how to stop." For the last 3 weeks, Ethan hadn't been Ethan Liu. He had been a ghost. He had spent his mornings at a high-intensity combat gym, not just for the physical training, but to watch the way the fighters moved when they were at the point of collapse. He noticed the way their eyes glazed over, the way their breathing became a rhythmic, desperate rasp. He spent his evenings in his apartment, recording himself over and over, analyzing the microscopic muscle movements in his face. "Too much," he muttered, playing back a clip of himself. "You're acting the pain. Leon doesn't feel pain. He just carries it." He picked up a pen and scratched a line through a note in his notebook. He replaced it with 3 words. "Silence is armor." A rhythmic, sharp knock sounded at the door. Ethan didn't even have to look at the clock. 7:30 p.m. Ryan was back from his weekend in Paris. Ethan pulled on a fresh hoodie, hiding the bruises on his torso, and opened the door. Ryan Zhao practically vibrated with energy. He was holding 2 bags of high-end sushi and a bottle of sake that was probably worth more than Ethan's monthly rent. "Lou, tell me you've eaten, because I'm about to force-feed you the best fatty tuna in the Northern Hemisphere," Ryan said, kicking the door shut with his heel. He looked around the apartment, his eyes landing on the scattered script pages. "Still at it? Man, you're going to turn into a piece of paper if you don't take a break." "It's a big role, Ryan," Ethan said, clearing a space on the table. "Jonathan Su isn't looking for a type. He's looking for a person. I have to be that person." Ryan sat down, his movements fluid and graceful, the movement of a man who had never had to worry about where his next meal or his next role was coming from. He opened the sushi containers, the scent of fresh fish and wasabi filling the small room. "I asked Marcus about the audition list today," Ryan said casually, dipping a piece of tuna into soy sauce. "Your name is definitely on it. But I heard a rumor. They're worried about your stunt background. They think you might be too physical. Not enough emotional range." Ethan felt a sharp prick of anxiety. "I've been working on the internal layers, Ryan. I'm focusing on the restraint." "I know you are, buddy. I told them." I said, "Ethan has the most intense internal life of anyone I know." Ryan leaned forward, his expression the picture of concern. "But you know how these producers are. They're like magpies. They want the shiny new thing. Hey, let me see what you've got. Maybe I can help you polish the edges." Ethan hesitated. His process was his sanctuary. But this was Ryan. Ryan, who had given him his old acting textbooks. Ryan, who had cheered him on when he was just an extra. "I'm working on the monologue from scene 12, Ethan said, standing up. "The one where he realizes he can't go back home." Ethan took a breath. He didn't do a performance. He simply stood in the center of his tiny kitchen, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the warmth of the room seemed to evaporate. He looked at a spot on the wall as if it were a memory he was trying to delete. "I forgot the way the door creaks," Ethan said, his voice a low, hollow vibration. "I forgot the smell of the rain on the porch. I spent so long trying to survive that I didn't realize I don't have anything left to survive for." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan didn't move for several seconds, his eyes still fixed on that distant point. When he finally returned, He saw Ryan staring at him. Ryan wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of unreadable intensity. For a fleeting second, his eyes weren't those of a friend. They were the eyes of a predator watching a threat. Then the mask broke. Ryan laughed and clapped his hands. Holy crap, Lou. That was terrifying. You actually made me feel cold. Ryan grabbed his phone. Do that again. Let me record it. I want to show Marcus. If he sees this, he can use it to pressure the casting director into giving you an earlier slot. The early slots are the only ones that matter with Jonathan Sue. You think so? Ethan asked, a flicker of hope warming his chest. I know so, Ryan insisted, setting up his phone on a stack of books. Come on. Give me that same ghost energy. For your career, man. Do it for the future. Ethan performed it again and again. Ryan coached him, giving him small tips that Ethan didn't realize were actually softening the impact of his performance, making it slightly more standard, slightly more like Ryan's own style. Perfect, Ryan said, checking the footage. I'll send this to Marcus tonight. Don't worry about a thing, Ethan. This is your year. I can feel it. The following week was a blur of silence. Ethan checked his phone every hour, waiting for the call with his audition time. Monday passed. Tuesday. Wednesday. He messaged Ryan. Hey, any word on the Shadowline schedule? I haven't heard from the casting office. No reply. On Thursday evening, Ethan was at the gym, his knuckles red from hitting the heavy bag, when his phone finally buzzed. It was a message from Ryan. Ethan, I just got off the phone with Marcus. I don't know how to tell you this. The production, they pulled a complete 180. They decided they don't want any unknowns for the supporting lead. They're looking for someone with international appeal. They canceled all the auditions for the new guys. I'm so sorry, man. I tried to push them, but Jonathan Sue is being a total wall about it. Ethan stopped mid-swing. The heavy bag thudded against his chest, but he didn't feel the impact. He felt like the floor had been pulled out from under him, leaving him suspended in a cold, dark void. Cancelled? He whispered. He sat down on the gym bench, the sounds of other people training, the grunts, the thud of gloves, the whistle of jump ropes, fading into a dull hum. He stared at the screen until it went black. He didn't think Ryan was lying. Why would he? Ryan was the one who had recorded him. Ryan was the one who had tried to help. Ethan just figured the industry had done what the industry does, chosen the safe bet over the talented risk. He walked home in a daze. The city lights looked blurry, like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. He felt a deep, crushing exhaustion that sleep wouldn't touch. That night, Ethan sat at his desk. He picked up his notebook. He looked at the pages filled with Leon's history, Leon's fears, Leon's soul. He felt like a man who had built a masterpiece in a bottle, only to watch the bottle shatter. He turned to the very last page of the notebook, the one he saved for his reflections. He picked up his pen. His hand was steady, which surprised him. He didn't feel like crying. He felt hollowed out. He wrote, "Preparation isn't wasted, even when the opportunity is." He closed the notebook with a soft thud. He didn't know that 3 miles away, in a sleek high-rise office, Jonathan Sue was watching a video. It wasn't the video Ryan had recorded of Ethan. It was a different tape. In the video, Ryan Zhao was performing the Scene 12 monologue. He was using Ethan's timing. He was using Ethan's specific hand tremor detail. He was even using the exact phrasing of Ethan's notes. "He's good," an assistant said to Jonathan Sue. "He's got that ghost energy you were looking for." Jonathan Sue narrowed his eyes at the screen. "It's polished," he said, his voice like grinding stones. "But it feels borrowed, like he's reciting a memory that isn't his." "Well, he's the only one who submitted this specific concept," the assistant replied. "The other guy, the stuntman Lou, his manager called and said he'd decided to withdraw. Said he was focusing on a permanent stunt coordinator position in Europe." Jonathan Sue grunted, turning away from the screen. "A waste. He had an interesting face." "Fine. Set up a meeting with Ryan Zhao." If he's the only one who understands the character, then he's the one we use. Back in his apartment, Ethan turned off the lights. He lay in the dark, listening to the city move outside his window. He thought about the red ball he'd seen a child drop earlier that day, the way it had rolled into the street, bright and hopeful, before being crushed by a passing car. He felt like that ball. "It's okay," he whispered into the silence. "I'll just wake up better tomorrow." But for the first time in 10 years, he didn't set his alarm for 5 a.m. He didn't see the point in waking up early to a world that wasn't looking for him. He rolled onto his side and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the alarm remained off. The grand crystal ballroom was a shimmering cage of gold leaf, velvet, and artificial light. To anyone watching the live broadcast, it was the pinnacle of human achievement. A night where the gods of the screen descended to be crowned. To Ethan Liu, sitting at table 42 near the kitchen service doors, it mostly smelled like floor wax and oversalted appetizers. Ethan adjusted the collar of his suit jacket. It was a decent suit, navy blue and tailored well enough, but it lacked the shimmering silk lapels and custom embroidery of the men sitting in the front rows. He was here as a guest of the Stunt Coordinators Guild, a courtesy invitation for a man who had given a lot to the physical safety of the industry. "You look like you're waiting for a bus," a voice whispered beside him. Ethan turned to see Mason, looking remarkably uncomfortable in a tuxedo that seemed 2 sizes too small for his massive frame. Mason was gripping a glass of sparkling water as if he intended to crush it. "I'm just trying to stay out of the way, Mason," Ethan said, offering a small, tired smile. "I'm only here to see Ryan. It's a big night for him." "It's a big night for a thief," Mason grumbled, his eyes scanning the room. "Look at him. Front row. Center. He's got 3 assistants just to handle his spare cufflinks. And you're back here with the guys who move the furniture." Ethan looked toward the front. Ryan Zhao was glowing. Literally. The stage lights caught the subtle shimmer in his hair and the perfect porcelain finish of his skin. He was laughing, leaning in to whisper something to a legendary director, his posture radiating the easy confidence of a man who knew he was the main character of the evening. Suddenly, Ryan's eyes scanned the back of the room. For a split second, they locked onto Ethan's. Ryan didn't wave, that would be unprofessional in a room full of cameras, but he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod and a wink. "See," Ethan whispered. "He's still the same guy." "Yeah," Mason muttered. "A guy who's a really good actor." The ceremony began with the usual fanfare. Long speeches about the magic of cinema and the responsibility of the artist. Ethan clapped politely for the technical awards, his mind still drifting to his own blank notebook at home. He kept thinking about the shadow line role. He wondered who the international star was that they had cast instead of him. And now, the presenter, a veteran actress with a voice like honey, said into the microphone, "The nominees for Best Rising Actor." The giant screens flickered to life. For faces appeared. Ryan's was the last. The clip they showed was the monologue from scene 12 of Shadowline, the very scene Ethan had performed in his kitchen only weeks ago. Ethan froze. He watched the screen, his breath hitching. Ryan was good. He was very good. But as the clip played, Ethan felt a cold, prickling sensation crawl up his spine. The way Ryan paused before the word home. The specific way his left hand trembled just before he turned away. The hollow, rasping tone of his voice. It wasn't just a similar performance. It was Ethan's performance. Every breath, every beat, every microscopic choice Ethan had shared with Ryan in his apartment had been transposed onto the screen. "The winner is Ryan Zhao." The room erupted. Mason let out a sharp, hissed breath, but Ethan couldn't move. He felt like his blood had turned to slush. He watched as Ryan stood up, looking shocked and humble, hugging his co-stars before making his way to the stage. Ryan took the golden trophy, gripping it with both hands. He waited for the applause to die down, his eyes misty. I didn't expect this," Ryan began, his voice cracking with a practiced vulnerability. "They say this industry is a lonely place, but I've been lucky. I want to thank my director, Jonathan Su, for taking a chance on a newcomer. I want to thank my manager, Olivia. But most of all, Ryan looked directly toward the back of the room, his gaze seemingly finding Ethan through the crowd of hundreds. I want to thank my best friend, Ethan Liu, a man who has been in the trenches with me since day one. Ethan, your belief in me is the reason I'm standing here. This award belongs to both of us. The crowd let out a collective A spotlight swung wildly around the room, frantically searching for Ethan. Ethan forced himself to stand, to smile, to nod. He felt like a mannequin. His face was a mask of pride, but inside, a dark, jagged crack was forming. What a load of garbage, Mason hissed under the cover of the standing ovation. Let's just get through the night, Ethan whispered. The after-party was held in a rooftop garden overlooking the city. It was loud, crowded, and smelled intensely of expensive gin. Ethan moved through the crowd like a ghost. People were celebrating, clinking glasses, and shouting over the music. No one looked at him. He was just another suit in a room full of stars. He needed air. He pushed through a set of heavy glass doors onto a side balcony that faced away from the main party. It was quieter here, the city's hum a muffled backdrop to the thumping bass inside. He leaned against the railing, his head in his hands. He thanked me, Ethan thought. He stood on that stage and told the world I was his inspiration. If he was lying, why would he do that? Maybe he just adapted my style because we've worked together so long. Maybe it wasn't intentional. Ethan was desperately trying to glue the pieces of his friendship back together. He wasn't ready for the truth. He heard the doors open behind him. Two people stepped out, their voices hushed but sharp. Ethan didn't move. He was tucked into a dark corner, obscured by a large potted palm tree. I'm telling you, Olivia, it's a miracle no one noticed, a man's voice said. Ethan recognized it. It was a junior producer from the Shadowline project. Nobody noticed because I made sure they didn't, a woman replied. Olivia Fong, Ryan's manager. Her voice was sharp, clinical, and sounded like she'd had just enough champagne to be dangerous. The director wanted a raw feel. Ryan gave it to him. He doesn't care where the raw came from. But the withdrawal? The producer asked. If Ethan Liu ever finds out that the casting office never actually sent that email, Ethan's heart stopped. He won't find out, Olivia snapped. The kid is a stuntman. He doesn't have an agent. He doesn't have connections. He barely has a phone plan. I sent the withdrawal from his own laptop while Ryan had him in the kitchen making tea. It was clean, professional. The producer chuckled. And the self-tapes? Ryan's performance tonight was a frame-for-frame copy of Liu's audition reel. I saw the original files, Olivia. Ryan even used the kid's notes for the backstory. Ryan is a star, Olivia said, her voice dropping into a cold, hard register. And stars are built, not born. Ethan Liu is talent without an image. Ryan is an image that needed talent. I just moved the assets to where they could do the most good for the company. Ethan will spend the next 5 years falling off roofs, happy as a clam because his best friend thanked him on TV. Everybody wins. Except Ethan. Ethan was never going to make it anyway, Olivia dismissed. He's too quiet, too honest. In this world, the honest people are just the ones who haven't been given a reason to lie yet. Now let's go back inside. Ryan needs to be seen with the studio heads. The doors clicked shut. Silence returned to the balcony. But for Ethan, the world was screaming. The air felt thin, freezing. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had made tea for Ryan while a decade of his life was being deleted. He thought about the notebook, the almosts, the rejections that he had blamed on himself, on his lack of skill, on his stuntman face. It hadn't been his fault. He hadn't been unlucky. He had been harvested. A slow, cold fury began to rise from his stomach, spreading through his chest until it reached his throat. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a fight. It was the steady, absolute cold of an iceberg. He looked back through the glass doors. He saw Ryan in the center of a circle of admirers, holding his trophy like a shield. Ryan looked up, his eyes catching Ethan's through the glass. Ryan smiled, that warm, supportive, best friend smile. Ethan didn't smile back. He didn't look away. For 10 years, he had been the shadow. He had been the one who took the fall. He had been the one who stayed invisible so the light could stay bright. But as Ethan watched the man who had stolen his life laugh at a joke he hadn't written, he realized something. The light can't exist without the shadow. And if the shadow decides to walk away, the star is left in the dark. Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't call the police. He didn't call a lawyer. He called a number he had saved weeks ago but had been too afraid to use. Sophia Lynn had been a respected casting director before recently starting her own agency. Weeks earlier, after one of Ethan's auditions, she had quietly handed him her card and told him to call if he ever wanted to talk about his future. Sophia, Ethan said, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. Ethan, Sophia Lynn answered, sounding surprised. It's late. Is everything okay? I saw the speech. I'm sorry about the award. I don't care about the award, Sophia, Ethan said, his eyes still fixed on Ryan. A while ago, you told me that if I ever decided to stop living for other people's careers and start building my own, I should call you. I remember. Did you mean it? I did. But you weren't ready then. What do you mean? Because every time I saw you, your first instinct was to talk about Ryan, help Ryan, recommend Ryan, or make excuses for Ryan. You were always standing beside your own future instead of walking toward it. Ethan watched Ryan take a sip of champagne, his face illuminated by a dozen camera flashes. I'm finished with that. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ethan heard Sophia draw a quiet breath. What changed, Ethan? I finally saw the script, he said, and I realized I'd spent years living someone else's story. Sophia was silent for a moment. Then decide what you intend to do about it, she said. Not what you want to do to Ryan. What you intend to do for yourself. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the ballroom. I'm going to become an actor. Then walk away tonight, Sophia said. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. He ended the call and walked back into the ballroom. He didn't look at the stars. He didn't look at the trophies. He walked straight through the center of the room, his head held high, his posture steady. As he passed Ryan's table, Ryan reached out and caught his arm. Lou, there you are. Come here, man. The head of the studio wants to meet. Ethan gently but firmly removed Ryan's hand. He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't give Ryan another chance to speak for him. He walked out of the hotel and into the cool night air. Ethan returned to his apartment at 2 a.m., the silence of the hallway pressing against his ears like a physical weight. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't need them. The orange street glow filtered through the thin curtains, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floorboards. He sat at his small desk, his tuxedo jacket still on, feeling the phantom heat of the awards ceremony's lights and the crushing cold of the truth he was about to uncover. Sleep was a distant country he couldn't reach. His mind was a frantic projector, replaying Olivia's hushed words on the balcony and the way Ryan's hand had trembled on stage while holding the trophy that should have been Ethan's. I told him not to keep those self-tapes. Finally, just before the first hint of dawn turned the sky gray, Ethan stood up. If there is an answer, he whispered to the empty room, it has to be in the records. He opened every folder he owned, digital and physical. He began a forensic audit of a decade of failure. He pulled up his bank statements, his work logs, and finally, his professional email account. First, everything appeared normal. The rejection letters were polite. The submission logs seemed routine. But then Ethan's eyes sharpened. He went to the sent folder and scrolled back 3 years, through hundreds of low-level project submissions, until his fingers stopped. He found an audition from 3 years ago marked in red. Withdrawn. Ethan froze. It was The Silent Son, the Paris search, the role he had been born for. He checked the email notification. It existed, time-stamped at 2:14 p.m. on August 14th. He looked at the metadata. The email had been received, but the status was unread on his primary device. Someone had logged in from his own laptop, sent the withdrawal, and archived the thread before he could ever see it. He closed his eyes and the memory rushed back with sickening clarity. August 14th. A Tuesday. Ryan had come over because his air conditioning was out and his apartment was unlivable. Ryan had looked stressed, sitting right here at this desk. Ethan remembered it perfectly. He had walked into the small kitchen to make a pot of tea to calm Ryan down. He had been gone for barely 5 minutes, just long enough for the kettle to whistle. He had been so careful not to disturb Ryan's concentration while he worked on his script. He never realized that, in those 5 minutes, his best friend was clicking away his future. Then, more inconsistencies surfaced like jagged rocks in a receding tide. A casting call for a detective drama that Ethan had mentioned only in passing. Ryan had known the specific side requirements before Ethan ever showed him the brief. He pulled out his old action choreography notebook. He flipped to page 42, the wrist flick concept. He opened a clip on his phone of Ryan's 2022 hit, The Sound of Shadows. It wasn't an influence. It was a mirror. Frame for frame, the sequence was an exact copy of the sketches in Ethan's hand. For a brief moment, another memory surfaced. Mason had watched that film with him after its premiere. Halfway through the fight sequence, Mason had frowned. "Didn't you show me this choreography months ago?" Ethan had laughed. Ryan probably just had the same idea. Mason hadn't looked convinced. Maybe. Or maybe someone copied your homework. Back then, Ethan had only rolled his eyes. Ryan was his best friend. He would never do something like that. Ethan lowered his gaze to the notebook in his hands. I really was an idiot. Not because he had trusted Ryan, but because he had refused to see what had been right in front of him. Ethan spread the documents across the apartment floor until the carpet was covered in paper. He began arranging them chronologically. A terrifying pattern emerged. Ryan never interfered with the small roles, the guard B parts, or the low-paying stunt jobs. He only struck when Ethan had a genuine chance at a breakthrough. The detective drama, the action series, the major supporting roles. Every single one had been intercepted, sabotaged, or stolen. Ethan didn't cry. He let out a single sharp laugh, a disbelieving, hollow sound that died quickly in the dark room. You knew, Ethan whispered, his eyes fixed on a photo of them from acting school. You knew exactly which dreams mattered, and you took them because you were afraid I'd surpass you. The pain wasn't that Ryan had succeeded. It was the realization that the betrayal was never a moment of desperation. It was a deliberate, 3-year harvest of Ethan's life. As the morning sunlight began to bleed into the room, Ethan picked up his acting notebook. He opened the page from the shadowline prep. Under his old note, Need to improve emotional restraint, he pressed his pen to the paper and wrote one final sentence. I never lost that audition. He closed the notebook with a soft thud. Tomorrow he would ask Ryan one question. And no matter what the answer was, the 10-year lie was over. The Metropolitan Academy of Dramatic Arts was a skeletal remains of its daytime self at 10 p.m. The grand, arched windows of the hallway let in the rhythmic, blue and white sweep of the city's emergency lights and neon signs, casting long, distorted shadows across the checkered linoleum. Ethan Liu stood in rehearsal room 4. It was the largest room in the building, the one reserved for senior showcases. The air here was stagnant, heavy with the scent of pine-scented floor wax and the faint, lingering aroma of theatrical makeup. A smell that, for 10 years, had meant hope. Now it just felt like dust. He didn't turn on the overhead lights. He didn't need them. He knew every inch of this room. He knew where the floorboards creaked under a heavy step. He knew where the mirror had a slight, jagged crack in the bottom left corner from a frustrated student years ago. He knew exactly where he and Ryan had stood a decade ago, shivering in their thin hoodies, sharing a single cup of instant noodles and promising that one day they would be the ones the world talked about. He looked at the stage, a raised wooden platform that felt like a holy altar to some and a gallows to others. To Ethan, tonight it looked like a crime scene. The heavy oak door at the end of the hallway groaned on its hinges. The sound of expensive leather shoes echoed against the walls, the footsteps quick, confident, and pulsing with the rhythm of a man who owned the world. Ethan? Man, what is with the secret meeting? Ryan's voice preceded him, sounding bright and airy, still vibrating with the adrenaline of his award win from the night before. I've been dodging my publicist all day. She wanted me to do a morning after live stream, but I told her I had to find my best friend first. We never got to finish our drink. Ryan stepped into the room, silhouetted by the harsh hallway light. He was dressed in a silk shirt and tailored slacks, looking every bit the superstar. He stopped when he saw Ethan standing in the darkness, unmoving. Lou, why are the lights off? You look like you're preparing for a ghost story. Ryan reached for the switch, but Ethan's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Leave them off, Ryan. I like the honesty of the dark. Ryan paused, his hand hovering over the switch. He let it drop, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly. The nation's sweetheart smile faltered, replaced by a cautious, guarded look. Okay, you're in one of your moods. I get it. The award night was intense. If you're feeling down about not getting the Shadowline role, we can talk about it. I've already spoken to Marcus about finding you I checked my email last night. Ryan, Ethan said. He hadn't moved. He was a statue in the center of the room. The sent folder. August 14th. 2:14 p.m. The silence that followed was so absolute it felt physical. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, but inside room 4, the only sound was the faint, rapid thrum of Ryan's breathing. I don't know what you're talking about, Ryan said. The lie was smooth, polished by years of practice, but his voice was a fraction of a semitone too high. You came over that day? Ethan continued, his voice calm, terrifyingly so. You said your AC was broken. I went to the kitchen to make you tea. I was gone for 5 minutes. That's all the time you needed to log into the casting portal and send a withdrawal for The Silent Sun. You told them I was quitting acting to be a full-time stuntman. Ethan, that's crazy. I also looked at my old choreography notes, Ethan interrupted. The ones for the blind fight scene on page 42. The ones you studied for reference while recording me on your phone. I compared them to your movie, The Sound of Shadows. It wasn't a reference, Ryan. It was a heist. Every move, every beat, even the limp you added to Leon. It was mine. Ryan took a step back, his foot catching on the edge of a floor mat. He let out a sharp, nervous laugh. Lou, we've been friends for a decade. We share everything. Remember that broken vase improv we did in this very room? I forgot every line, and you stepped in to save me. You carried me then. My success is your success. I've always said that. I even said it on stage last night. You didn't share your success, Ryan. You used my life as a draft for yours, Ethan said. He finally turned to face him. The faint light from the hallway caught the edge of Ethan's eyes, making them look like polished flint. Every time I got close to a door, you locked it. You made me believe I was unlucky. You made me believe the industry was the problem. You sat in my kitchen, drank my tea, and watched me cry because I thought I wasn't good enough. All while you had my future tucked in your pocket. Ryan's face contorted. The perfect gentleman mask didn't just crack. It shattered, falling away to reveal something jagged and ugly underneath. He didn't try to deny it anymore. He didn't have the energy. And what if I did? Ryan screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. Look at you, Ethan. You're too quiet. You're too honest. You would have sat in this room for another 20 years waiting for the right moment. The industry doesn't work that way. It's a meat grinder. It doesn't reward the best actor. It rewards the one who knows how to survive. Ryan took a step toward him, his eyes wide and bloodshot. I did what had to be done. I took your talent and I gave it a face the world could actually love. I made your work useful. If I hadn't taken those roles, some other hack would have. I kept telling myself, if I succeeded first, I'd pull you up with me. I just needed to be stable first. You made my talent useful? Ethan's voice was a whisper now, vibrating with a cold, crystalline fury. You didn't just steal my career, Ryan. You stole my time. You stole the years I could have spent becoming who I was meant to be. You made me a ghost in my own life so you could feel significant. I made you a star's best friend. Ryan countered, his hands shaking. You have a roof over your head because of the consulting fees I gave you. You have a life because I kept you close. No, Ethan said, taking a step toward the stage. I have a life because I didn't let you kill the person I was meant to be. I spent 10 years thinking I was your shadow. But last night I realized the truth. You aren't the light, Ryan. You're just a mirror. And you've spent your whole life reflecting a version of me because you have nothing of your own to show. Ryan's face went pale. He looked at the trophy he had left on the floor near the door. A golden weight that suddenly looked like trash. You can't prove anything, he hissed, the panic returning. Olivia is the only one who knows, and she's loyal to the agency. If you go to the press, I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you never work as a nameless guard again. Ethan looked at him with something that wasn't even anger anymore. It was pity. It was the look a man gives a dying animal. He realized then that Ryan wasn't desperate. He was deliberate. He had carefully chosen which of Ethan's dreams to take away. I'm not going to the press, Ryan, Ethan said. I don't need to. You're already doing the work for me. What does that mean? The industry is small, Ethan said, walking toward the exit. People notice patterns. They notice when a star stops growing. They notice when the nation's sweetheart starts treating the crew like dirt because he's afraid someone will see through the act. You're losing them, Ryan, and you're doing it all by yourself. Ethan, get back here, Ryan shouted, stumbling after him. You owe me. I'm the reason anyone even knows your name. Ethan stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. You're right about one thing, Ryan. People do know my name now, but they don't know it because of you. They know it because they're starting to see the difference between an image and an actor. We're brothers, Ryan cried out, his voice breaking into a sob. You can't just walk away. I don't have anyone else. Ethan finally looked back. He looked at the boy he had loved like a brother, the boy he had protected, and the man who had traded that love for a piece of gold-plated plastic. We were never brothers, Ryan, Ethan said quietly. I was a friend. You were just a fan who got a job playing me. The show is over. Call your publicist. I think you have a scandal to manage. Ethan walked out into the hallway. He didn't look back when he heard the sound of a chair being thrown against the mirror in room 4. He didn't stop when he heard Ryan screaming his name, the sound muffled by the heavy doors. As he walked down the stairs of the academy, he felt a strange, light sensation in his chest. It was the feeling of a tether snapping. For 10 years, he had been pulled along by a dream that wasn't his, anchored to a man who didn't exist. He stepped out of the building and into the cool night air. The city was still there, loud and chaotic and indifferent. But as Ethan Liu walked toward the subway, his head was held high. For the first time in years, his footsteps felt light. The air in Ethan's apartment was thick with tension and the suffocating smell of stale coffee. It had been 4 hours since he had walked away from Ryan Zhao at the academy, but the echoes of the confrontation seemed to vibrate in the walls. Mason Huang was a blur of motion, pacing the 6-foot span of the living area like a caged tiger. He admitted it. Ethan, he literally stood there and said the words. Mason slammed a meaty fist into his palm, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. Why are we sitting here? Why aren't we talking to a lawyer? At the very least, let me leak those emails to the fan forums. I could have his nation's sweetheart title stripped by sunrise. Ethan was sitting at his small kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. He looked remarkably still, the kind of stillness he usually reserved for a high-stakes stunt where one wrong move meant a broken bone. Because there's nothing to leak, Mason, Ethan said quietly. What do you mean? You found the withdrawal email. It's right there on the screen. On my computer, Ethan reminded him, his voice flat and analytical. Sent from my IP address, probably using my password that he watched me type 100 times. To a lawyer, it looks like I sent it. To the public, it looks like I'm making up a story because I'm jealous that my best friend won an award and I didn't. Most of our conversations happened face-to-face. Managers have changed. Phones have been replaced. Legally, there is almost nothing I can prove. Mason stopped pacing and stared at him. So he just gets away with it? He just keeps your life. He dragged a hand across his face. Before you get angry, I called Sophia. I didn't know what else to do. Before Ethan could answer, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't the heavy, aggressive thud of a stuntman. It was 3 sharp, rhythmic raps that carried a professional weight. Sophia Lynn walked in before Ethan could even stand. She was dressed in a sharp, slate-gray trench coat, her hair pulled back into a severe bun. She took one look at the room. The scattered papers, Mason's red face, and the hollow intensity in Ethan's eyes, and sighed. From Mason's message, I assume the confrontation went exactly as expected, Sophia said, pulling out the 3rd chair at the table. He bragged about it, Sophia, Mason growled. He said he made Ethan's talent useful. Sophia turned her focus to Ethan, her voice becoming ice-cold and practical. You have 2 choices, Ethan. You can spend the next 5 years in courtrooms and deposition rooms, fighting a battle you will likely lose because the industry protects its assets. You might eventually get a settlement, but your name will be synonymous with trouble. Directors may stop hiring you. Producers will begin treating your name like a risk. You'll be a footnote in Ryan Zhao's biography, the bitter friend who tried to sue his way to the top. Ethan looked up. And the second choice? You let him have the past, Sophia said. He's already lived it. It's gone. You decide that from this moment on, your name belongs only to you. You stop being the victim of a theft and start being the architect of a career. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. If we accuse him now, you'll become the story, Ethan, not Ryan. And the industry doesn't forgive people who bring scandals without proof. Ethan understood, not because Ryan deserved protection, but because the truth alone wasn't enough to build a future. That night, after Mason and Sophia left, the apartment was silent. Ethan began the ritual of letting go. He walked to the walls of his room and began removing every photograph of Ryan. He took down the picture of them on their first day of acting school. He took down the group shots from the few rap parties he had been invited to. Every celebration, every shared memory. He didn't throw them away. He placed them carefully, face down, inside a cardboard box. Then he quietly pushed the box into the back of his closet, behind his old equipment. He wasn't ready to forgive. He wasn't ready to hate. He was simply finished living in a past that had been a heist. Before closing the closet door, he hesitated. He looked at his old acting notebook sitting on the shelf, the one filled with the records of his rejections. He reached for it, intending to put it in the box, but his fingers stopped on the worn leather. He looked at it for a long time. He saw the rejected stamps. He saw the notes on how to be better. He smiled faintly. He didn't put the notebook in the box. He took it back. The notebook still belonged in his hands. His past was gone, but his craft was still his. The next morning, Mason returned. He found Ethan sitting at the table, looking out the window as the sun hit the city's skyscrapers. So, Mason asked, his voice low, "What now?" Ethan answered without a second of hesitation. "I won't destroy him." Mason frowned. "Ethan, I'll become someone he cannot ignore," Ethan said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "But I won't build my future around destroying him. I'm going to become the actor he tried to keep hidden." Mason studied him for a long moment. Then a grin slowly broke across his face. "That's the Ethan I know." Sophia arrived 10 minutes later. She didn't ask how he had slept. She simply reached into her pocket and handed him a thick, cream-colored business card. "Good," she said, "because revenge ends stories. A career begins them." She tapped the card. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. If you're serious about building one, we have a great deal to discuss." Ethan looked at the card. For the first time since the award ceremony, he imagined a future that did not include Ryan. He took it. What time? Sophia Lynn was a name that carried weight in the industry, though not for the reasons most people expected. A former casting director, she had spent 2 decades sitting on the other side of the mahogany tables, watching thousands of actors walk into the room. She had seen the desperate, the arrogant, and the manufactured. But one actor kept appearing in her memory. Ethan Liu. She had watched him for years, appearing in the background of her casting calls for bit parts and stunt roles. She hadn't watched him because he booked many roles, usually he didn't. She watched him because every time he walked into an audition, he left behind a performance that lingered in the room long after the door had closed. Ethan sat in her office now, the morning light making the space feel vast and quiet. He waited for her to speak, his posture reflecting the discipline of a decade in the shadows. "You know what frustrated me the most about you, Ethan?" Sophia finally asked, leaning back in her chair. Ethan looked at her, waiting. "You almost never got the role," she said, her voice steady. "But every director I ever worked with remembered you. They would mention your name weeks later, wondering about the stunt guy who had made the room feel so heavy." Ethan looked genuinely surprised. He shifted slightly, the leather of the chair creaking in the silence. "They did." Sophia offered a rare, thin smile. "They did. You didn't lose those roles because you lacked talent. You lost them because they just didn't always have the right character to fit what you were bringing. You weren't a tool, and they didn't know how to use an artist in a bit part." She stood up and walked around her desk, stopping to look him directly in the eyes. There was no sympathy in her gaze, only a sharp, professional clarity. "I am offering to be your agent, Ethan. And I want to be clear, this is not out of pity. This is out of professional conviction. I've watched actors for 20 years. I know talent when I see it, and I know that what you have is rare." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a serious, commanding register. "You don't need revenge against Ryan Zhao. Revenge is a distraction. You need a career. You need to become the actor you've been practicing to be for 10 years. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the rejections, the notebooks, and the years of being a ghost. For the first time in weeks, the hollow ache of betrayal was replaced by something else. Ethan smiled for the first time in weeks. A real, grounded smile. For the first time since the award ceremony, the future didn't feel like a threat. Felt possible. Ethan had spent the last 2 days reviewing everything he could find about Shadowline. He already knew Jonathan Sue's reputation. The director valued preparation, discipline, and honesty, qualities Ethan had spent 10 years developing. There was little else to learn. Adrian Shin was different. He was the film's lead, the face Victoria Entertainment protected above all else. If Ethan was going to find a way back into Shadowline, he wanted to understand the production's biggest variable. In the City of Lights, Adrian Shin was more than a man, he was a broadcast. You couldn't walk into a convenience store without his face looking down from the television screens mounted above the aisles. You couldn't check your phone without a push notification announcing his latest award or a glimpse of his perfect gentleman's smile. On social media, his name was a permanent fixture, a digital heartbeat that never skipped a beat. National celebrity. Award-winning icon. To the world, he was the sun, bright, untouchable, and constant. But as Ethan Liu sat at his small kitchen table, he didn't see the icon. He saw the ink. Ethan's table was buried under a landscape of paper that would have looked like madness to anyone else. There were glossy magazine spreads, grainy tabloid clippings, and printed logs of social media trends spanning the last 2 years. He had used different colored highlighters to track the movement of information, red for the rumor, blue for the project announcement, and green for the eventual, quiet correction. He had spent 48 hours mapping the noise, and he had found a pattern. Every week, a new rumor appeared. A dating scandal on Monday, a personality controversy on Wednesday, a celebrity feud on Thursday. To the public, it looked like the chaotic, glamorous life of a superstar who couldn't stay out of the headlines. But to an observer like Ethan, a man who had spent 10 years watching the industry from the shadows, it looked like a script. Every single controversy disappeared within days, scrubbed clean from the headlines as if by an invisible hand the moment it was no longer useful. The sharp, professional click of high heels echoed in the hallway before a key turned in the lock. Sophia Lin walked into the apartment, pausing as she took in the forensic mess spread across the table. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the web of connections Ethan had pinned to his wall. I thought we were preparing for your transition into leading roles, Sophia said, her voice holding that familiar agent edge. I thought we were preparing to get you back into Shadowline. Why are you spending all your time on Adrian Shin? He's the agency's crown jewel, Ethan. Looking too closely at a jewel usually gets you cut. Ethan didn't look up. He was staring at a specific set of dates from the previous June. I'm not looking at the jewel, Sophia. I'm looking at the setting. I'm looking at why they keep throwing him into the fire. He tapped a series of clippings spread across the center of the table. Look at the timing. Last June, a dating scandal broke between Adrian and a popular actress on a Tuesday morning. It was loud, messy, and dominated every entertainment blog for 3 days. But look at what happened at the exact same time on the financial boards. Ethan pulled a printed corporate report from the pile and slid it toward her. The board of Victoria Entertainment was holding an emergency meeting about a massive embezzlement case involving the CEO's son. The public never saw a single headline about it. They were too busy arguing about whether Adrian was getting married. And the moment the board meeting ended on Friday, the rumor was debunked with a polite, misunderstanding statement. Sophia leaned in, her interest sharpening as she looked at the red and blue highlights on the paper. It's happened 4 times in the last 2 years, Ethan continued, his voice calm and analytical. Every time the agency makes a corporate mess, they set a small fire around Adrian Shin to keep the smoke from reaching the board members. He isn't unlucky with the press. He's being used as a human lightning rod. They're sacrificing his personal reputation to protect their stock prices. Sophia stood back, a slow, impressed smile spreading across her face. She looked at the man she had just signed, a man who had spent 10 years being a tool for the industry and who had spent that time learning exactly how the industry used people. You really do see stories differently, Ethan, she said softly. Ethan looked at a high-definition close-up of Adrian Shin from a recent magazine. The superstar looked composed, his expression a mask of perfect, distant gentleness. But Ethan saw the rigid tension in the jaw, a soul being managed like a disposable resource. Unfair is still unfair, Ethan replied, closing his notebook with a soft thud. If no one notices the pattern, it just keeps happening. He's the most famous man in the country, and he's the only person who doesn't own his own life. Sophia nodded, her decision to represent him feeling more like a strategic victory with every passing second. Well, strategist, let's see if that analytical mind can turn that pattern into the door you've been waiting for. Ethan looked out the window at the rising sun. He was ready to walk into the room. Ethan Liu didn't believe in shortcuts. He had spent 10 years watching people take them, only to see them trip on the very same wires they tried to bypass. He wasn't going to Victoria Tower to ask for a favor or a handout. He was going there for an opportunity, a door that he could walk through on his own merit. The first time he walked into the lobby of Victoria Tower, he was met with the cold, professional wall of the front desk. I'm here to see Marcus Wei, Ethan said. The receptionist didn't even look up from her screen. Do you have an appointment? No. I'm representing Ethan Liu. Mr. Wei is fully booked for the next 3 months. You can leave a portfolio with the mailroom. Ethan didn't leave a portfolio. He simply nodded politely and sat down in one of the sleek, uncomfortable designer chairs in the corner of the lobby. He stayed there for 6 hours. He watched the ebb and flow of the industry. The famous faces hurried through private elevators, the desperate managers pleading with assistance, and the delivery couriers who moved through the building like ghosts. Marcus Wei eventually stepped out of the elevator at 6 p.m. Ethan stood up, but Marcus didn't even break his stride. Mr. Shun isn't meeting unknown actors, Marcus snapped, his voice tight with the stress of the Valerius leak. Try a casting agency, kid. I understand, Ethan said. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just offered a respectful bow and walked out into the evening rain. The next day, Ethan returned. He arrived at 8 a.m. He sat in the same chair. He opened his notebook and began analyzing the production logs for the Vanguard project, looking for the cracks in the management strategy. Marcus Wei walked past him 3 times that day. Each time, he gave Ethan a sharper, more annoyed glance. Each time, Ethan responded with a silent, polite nod. The third day, the reception staff began to recognize him. By the fourth day, one of the younger receptionists quietly placed a glass of water on the side table next to him. "You're becoming part of the furniture, you know?" she joked softly as she passed. Ethan smiled, a small, tired, but genuine expression. "I'll take that as progress." He never complained about the wait. He didn't harass the staff. He was simply there. A quiet, constant presence that was becoming impossible to ignore. Even Marcus Way was beginning to find him strangely difficult to dislike. In an industry where everyone screamed to be heard, Ethan's silence was starting to sound like a challenge. On the fifth afternoon, Marcus finally stopped. He stood in front of Ethan, his hands on his hips, looking down at the man who had occupied his lobby for nearly 40 hours. 5 minutes, Marcus sighed, checking his watch with a look of pure exhaustion. "That is all you are getting. If you waste them, I'm calling security to have you banned from the building." Ethan stood up, his movements fluid and precise, showing no signs of the physical toll of sitting for 5 days. 5 minutes is all I need." The office of Marcus Way was a high-pressure chamber of dark leather and the blue glow of monitors. Marcus didn't sit down. He gestured toward the center of the room. "So," a new voice said. Ethan turned. Adrian Shin was standing by the window, silhouetted against the city skyline. He was dressed in a simple gray hoodie, looking less like a superstar and more like a man who was tired of being a legend. Adrian didn't move. He studied Ethan carefully, his gray eyes searching for the usual signs of a seeker. The hidden camera, the headshot tucked in a sleeve, the desperate gleam of a fan. He found none of it. Ethan met his gaze with a terrifyingly steady focus. "What do you want?" Adrian asked. His voice was a low, melodic rasp that seemed to vibrate in the quiet room. Ethan answered immediately. "I don't want a role. I don't want a recommendation. I want a chance to audition for Leon in Shadowline." Adrian raised an eyebrow. The cynicism in his expression flickered for a second. "That's different. Most people come in here asking me to sign a contract or put in a good word. They want me to do the work for them. You're asking for more work. A role means you believe in me," Ethan said, his voice resonant and calm. "An audition means I prove whether you should." Marcus let out a short, skeptical huff. Why should Adrian help a stuntman get into a room with Jonathan Sue? What's in it for him? Ethan looked Adrian directly in the eyes. "Because I can help you too. You have a reputation for being difficult, because you're a perfectionist in an inefficient system. I've mapped the rumors, Adrian. I know why your life is a mess, and I know how to make the noise stop. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a professional exchange." For the first time, Adrian looked genuinely interested. He stepped away from the window, moving into the light of the desk lamp. He looked at the notebook Ethan had laid on the desk, the one that contained the Tuesday scrambles and the Friday debunks. Adrian looked at the handwritten line on the first page. "Truth before technique." "You're unusual, Ethan Liu," Adrian murmured. He leaned back against the mahogany desk, a small, rare smile playing on his lips, the kind of smile he never gave to the paparazzi. "Most people are afraid of the industry. You're trying to rewrite it." Adrian held Ethan's gaze for another moment before a faint smile appeared. "Then convince me." Ethan inclined his head. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an audition. But for the first time in 10 years, someone hadn't dismissed him before giving him a chance to speak. Marcus stepped toward the office door. "I'll be in touch," he said. Ethan offered a respectful bow to them both. As he walked back through the lobby, the digital screen above the reception desk was still playing Ryan Zhao's latest cologne advertisement. This time, Ethan didn't look at it. He walked out of Victoria Tower carrying something far more valuable than hope. He carried an opportunity. The following afternoon, Marcus Way's assistant called Ethan back to Victoria Tower. Adrian studied Ethan for several moments. "If we do this, it happens my way." Adrian straightened up, his height making Ethan have to look up just a fraction. "I'll establish 3 rules. Rule 1, no special treatment. I will not put in a good word for you with directors. I will not ask producers to look at your reel. If you get into a room, it's because your talent got you there. I can open the door, Ethan. Walking through it is your job. That's exactly what I want, Ethan said, his voice hard as flint. Rule 2, Adrian continued, his gaze searching for any flicker of greed. No guaranteed success. If you audition and you're terrible, I won't interfere. If you get cast and you can't handle the pressure, I won't catch you. You fail alone. Ethan didn't blink. He thought of the 3 years of stolen heartbeats and the 5 years of nameless falls. I've been falling for 10 years, Adrian. I know how to land. A flicker of something, a ghost of a smile, passed over Adrian's face. For the first time in a long while, the superstar looked genuinely interested. Rule 3. I only give you the opportunity to be seen by the people who matter. What you do once you walk through that door is entirely up to you. This partnership is about access, not charity. Do you accept? I accept, Ethan said without a second of hesitation. Adrian looked at Ethan for several more moments, then turned to Marcus. 1 week. We decide in 1 week. Marcus sighed, dropping a thick, leather-bound folder onto the desk. Great. Now that the blood oath is out of the way, can we talk about the Valerius watch leak? If we don't fix this by Friday, the board is going to have my head, and Adrian loses a $10 million contract. Adrian looked back at Ethan. This is your first test. 1 week to find the solution. If your answer impresses me, we continue. If not, this conversation never happened. Ethan didn't ask for clarification. He didn't ask for more time. No complaints, he said simply. No negotiations. Marcus quietly watched the exchange. He had spent years protecting Adrian from people who wanted to take. For the first time, he was looking at someone who only wanted to prove his own worth. He found himself starting to believe that Ethan might actually be different. Ethan picked up the folder. His strategic mind, honed by years of watching people from the corners of sets, was already clicking into gear. I don't need a week. I need 48 hours and access to your internal vendor list for the Stage 5 shoot. Adrian turned back toward the window, looking out at the city skyline. Get him what he needs, Marcus. Let's see if our underdog can actually bite. Ethan offered a respectful bow and walked out of the office. His movements were fluid and confident, showing no sign of the weight he was now carrying. As the door clicked shut, Marcus looked at Adrian. Do you really think he'll come back? Most people would have taken the 5 minutes and run to a tabloid. Adrian didn't turn around. He watched Ethan's reflection in the glass of the window as the younger man walked through the lobby. If he doesn't come back, Adrian calmly answered, then he was never serious about the work. But I have a feeling, Marcus. We just met the only person in this building who isn't wearing a mask. Ethan spent the next 48 hours in the only world that had ever been honest with him. The shadows. He didn't sit in Sophia's sleek office or wait for a phone call. Instead, he pulled his old stunt jacket from the back of the closet, the one with the permanent scent of wood smoke and gear grease, and headed into the industrial heart of the city. He went to the loading docks where the equipment trucks were packed at midnight, to the cramped catering vans where the crews ate their standing-up meals, and to the late-night tailor shops where the pins and needles did the real work of making superstars look like gods. At a massive warehouse on the edge of the shipping district, Ethan sat on a rusted equipment crate with a group of grips he had known for years. He didn't ask, who leaked the Valerius contract? In this world, that was the kind of question that got you a closed door. Instead, he shared a bag of spicy skewers and listened to the rhythm of the work. Management is on a warpath, one grizzled technician grunted, wiping a streak of oil across his forehead. They're checking everyone's phone logs because of that watch leak. Ethan leaned back, looking like a man with nothing but time. I heard Stage 5 was a mess during the fitting. Too many new faces. Tell me about it, another grip said. Silk and Stitch brought in some interns to help with paperwork. One of them barely worked. Kid kept wandering around with his phone out like he was sightseeing instead of working. Which one? Tall kid. Yellow vendor lanyard. Name was Justin. Ethan felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. He had his lead. On the second afternoon, Ethan sat in a nondescript coffee shop across from Victoria Tower, watching employees file out for their lunch break. His attention settled on the familiar yellow vendor lanyard. He rose and followed the young man at an unhurried distance for several blocks. The temporary worker's ID badge identified him as Justin Vance. Justin never noticed. He checked his phone every few minutes, glanced over his shoulder more often than necessary, and carried himself with the restless confidence of someone who believed he'd gotten away with something. Ethan watched until he had learned everything simple observation could tell him. Justin wasn't the mastermind behind the leak, but he was the only loose thread Ethan had found. Exactly 48 hours after Adrian had given him the assignment, Ethan returned to Victoria Tower. He arrived precisely on time. Gone was the worn hoodie from their first meeting. In its place was a clean black shirt and dark trousers, though his boots still carried the dust of the warehouse floor. Marcus Way was waiting, looking as though he was already preparing to call security. Adrian sat on the edge of the mahogany desk, arms crossed, studying Ethan with guarded curiosity. Without a word, Adrian handed him a fresh folder filled with the morning's damage. Dating rumors, fabricated scandals, and negative headlines attempting to bury the Valerius leak beneath fresh gossip. "What do you see?" Adrian asked. Ethan skimmed the folder for only a few moments before closing it. "Confirmation," he said calmly. Marcus frowned. "Confirmation of what?" "That the Valerius leak follows the same pattern I showed you before we met." Someone wanted the public focused on Adrian instead of tomorrow's Kronos negotiations. The room fell silent. Ethan placed a single page on the conference table. "I believe the leak originated with a temporary vendor named Justin Vance. He was assigned to Stage 5 during the Valerius fitting. According to the vendor list, he had both access to the room and the freedom to move through it without attracting attention." Marcus immediately reached for the office phone. "Get me Justin Vance's file. Now." Less than a minute later, Marcus scanned the electronic personnel record. His expression hardened with each line. "Temporary contractor, silk and stitch." He scrolled farther. "Emergency contact, Emily Vance." Marcus looked up sharply. "She works for Horizon Artists." Adrian's eyes narrowed. Marcus continued reading before slowly lowering the tablet. "There's also a recent transfer request and an offer letter drafted by Horizon." Ethan gave a small nod. "Justin isn't the mastermind. He's the opening they found." "I'll destroy them," Marcus whispered, his face turning a deep, dangerous purple. "I'll call the lawyers now." "Wait," Ethan said, raising a hand. "If you react aggressively, you're following their schedule. You're giving them exactly what they want, more noise. The watch brand will see the legal drama and instability, and they'll walk away anyway. In this industry, the truth alone isn't enough. You need to change the channel." Adrian leaned forward, his interest finally outweighing his cynicism. "Then what's the move, strategist?" "Overshadow them," Ethan said. "Tomorrow morning, 2 hours before the rumor is scheduled to hit the main blogs, announce that you're donating a portion of your Valerius signing bonus to a fund for retired stunt performers and crew members. Make the story about the people behind the scenes. It's a narrative the tabloids can't twist into a scandal. If anyone tries to bring up the leaked contract after that, they look like they're attacking a charitable act. The rumor will die in the crib because it's no longer profitable." Adrian stood up slowly. He walked toward Ethan until they were standing in the same pool of light. He looked at the paper Ethan had prepared, then at Ethan's tired but steady eyes. Eyes that had spent a decade seeing what everyone else chose to ignore. "You put all of this together in less than 2 days," Adrian murmured. "I've spent years studying people, Adrian," Ethan shrugged. "When you're the one carrying the equipment, the patterns are easier to see. People don't hide the truth from the furniture." For the first time, Adrian smiled. It was a faint, genuine expression that reached his eyes. He wasn't interested in Ethan because he was useful anymore. He was interested because Ethan approached the world with a level of integrity and intelligence that Adrian hadn't seen in years. "Arrange the audition, Marcus," Adrian said, his voice cold and clear. Marcus blinked. For shadow line? Are you sure? The director is all ready. I'm sure, Adrian interrupted. He looked back at Ethan. Put him last on the list for tomorrow. I want him to be the one they remember when the door closes. Ethan felt a jolt of electricity run through him. This was it. The door was open. Go home, Ethan, Adrian said, reaching out to open the office door himself. Get some sleep. You've proven you can handle the strategy. Tomorrow, I want to see the actor. Ethan offered a deep, respectful bow. As he walked out of the office and through the lobby, he noticed the same digital screen playing Ryan Zhao's cologne ad. Ethan walked through the lobby without looking at Ryan's advertisement. The waiting room at the Central Casting Plaza felt like a high-pressure steamer, a place where careers were either forged or melted into nothing. The air was thick with the scent of expensive hair products, freshly pressed silk, and the low, anxious murmur of agents whispering last-minute instructions. Every man in the long, narrow hallway was a type. There were the rugged veterans who leaned against the walls with practiced indifference, and the pretty boys who checked their reflections in the glass doors every 30 seconds, desperate to ensure their marketable faces hadn't caught a stray smudge. In the very first chair, closest to the door, sat Ryan Zhao. He was a portrait of success, surrounded by 2 assistants and a manager who stood like a palace guard. Ryan looked perfect, his skin glowing, his hair a work of art. The confidence from last night's award still clung to him. The hallway went quiet when Ethan walked in. He wasn't wearing a designer label. He wore a sharp, dark charcoal blazer and black trousers, clothes that were professional but didn't scream for attention. He didn't have a team. He didn't have a trophy. He had his notebook and a gaze that was so dangerously focused it made the air around him feel cold. Ryan spotted him and stood up, his perfect gentleman smile appearing like a reflex. Ethan. He glanced at the audition room. Didn't expect to see you here. Did Marcus find you a spot on the safety crew? Ethan stopped. He didn't offer the humble bow he had given for 10 years. He didn't smile. He looked at Ryan as if he were a piece of set dressing that was being moved. I'm here to read for Leon, Ryan. I heard the room was finally open for actors. Ryan's smile didn't fade, but his eyes turned as hard as marbles. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a hiss meant only for Ethan. Leon? Ethan, buddy, look around. This isn't a workshop. This is Jonathan Su. He's the butcher of actors. He'll eat you alive in there. You don't have the image for this. Why don't you just go home? I'll tell the director you were just dropping off some notes for me. I can still find you a coordinator gig on my next film. 10% more than your usual rate. Think about your future, Ethan. I don't want your 10%. Ryan? Ethan said, his voice resonant and steady, carrying through the quiet hall until several other actors looked up. And I'm done being the depth for your light. I spent 10 years learning how to survive. Today I'm going to learn how to win. Enjoy the room. I'll see you on the other side. Ryan's face flickered with a sudden, sharp unease. For the first time, he saw that Ethan wasn't reacting emotionally. He wasn't angry or hurt. He was simply finished. Ethan walked to the far end of the hallway and sat down. He didn't look at Ryan again. He opened his notebook, the new one, and began to read his notes on Leon. He watched as, one by one, the actors were called in. They walked out looking defeated, their faces pale. Jonathan Su was notorious for stopping actors mid-sentence and telling them to go find a different career. Ethan Liu? The assistant called out. Ethan stood up. He felt Sophia's sharp, encouraging nod from the doorway. He walked toward the audition room, leaving the shadow version of himself in the hallway. The door closed with a heavy, pressurized thud. The room was large and cavernous, lit only by a single spotlight hitting a wooden chair in the center. Behind a long, dark table sat 3 figures. 2 producers Ethan didn't recognize were whispering over a tablet, and in the center sat the man who refused outside influence, Jonathan Su. He looked like he was made of old leather and cigarette smoke. Su didn't look up from his notes. Lou, the stuntman. Adrian says you have insights. I don't care about insights. I care about the camera. You have 3 minutes. Page 15. The betrayal scene. Start whenever you're ready. Ethan didn't go to the chair. He stayed standing. He closed his eyes and let the silence of the room settle into his bones. He wasn't thinking about the producers. He was thinking about the noodle nook. He was thinking about the withdrawal email. He was thinking about the 10 years of making tea for a man who was busy deleting his existence. He opened his eyes. In that heartbeat, Ethan Lu vanished. He was Leon. He was a man who had been hit so many times he had forgotten what it felt like to be whole. He looked at the empty space where the brother in the script was supposed to be. He didn't shout. He didn't perform sadness. He spoke the lines with a terrifying, hollow clarity that made the air in the room feel 10 degrees colder. I used to wonder why the world felt so cold, Ethan whispered, his voice a low rasp that carried to every corner of the room. I thought it was the wind. I thought it was the rain. I didn't realize it was just you. Standing in the doorway, keeping the sun out, he took a slow, shuddering breath. His left hand, hanging at his side, began to perform a microscopic tremor, a physical manifestation of a soul finally reaching its breaking point. Every stunt he had ever performed, every failed audition, every night spent in the shadows was present in that single shaking hand. It wasn't a concept. It was the truth. When he finished the final line, he didn't return to being Ethan immediately. He stayed in the character's exhaustion, his chest heaving slightly. Jonathan Su was leaning forward now, his chin resting on his interlaced fingers. He had stopped looking at his notes halfway through the performance. He was staring at Ethan as if he were seeing a ghost that had just walked through the wall. "Who taught you that timing?" Su asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Life, sir," Ethan replied, his voice returning to its normal, humble tone. The producer to Su's left leaned over, looking confused. "Ryan Zhao just did that same scene an hour ago. The concepts were identical. The hand tremor, the pause before the final line. It's the same reel." "Identical?" Jonathan Su barked a short, dry laugh. "The concepts were the same. The performance wasn't. Zhao was playing a part. This kid was telling the truth. One is an image. The other is an actor." Su picked up a red pen and drew a thick, aggressive circle around Ethan's name on the list. It was the first time he had smiled all morning. "Get out of here. Marcus will call your agent. Don't get a haircut. I like the look of a man who's been through a war and survived." Ethan stood, offered a respectful bow, and walked out. When he stepped back into the hallway, Ryan was standing near the reception desk while his manager spoke quietly with one of the casting assistants. Ryan glanced over. His gaze moved across Ethan's face, searching for the familiar signs of rejection. "Finished already?" he asked, his tone casually dismissive. "I suppose Su didn't need the full 3 minutes." Ethan stopped and met his eyes. For the first time in a decade, Ryan was the one searching his face for answers. "Su saw me, Ryan," Ethan said calmly. "That's all I needed." Ryan's expression froze. Ethan walked past him and out of the building into the bright morning sun. For the first time in years, the light didn't feel blinding. Felt like home. As Ethan's footsteps faded, Jonathan Su turned to his assistant. He didn't look at the other portfolios on the table. He didn't ask about the next actor. He simply spoke 4 words. "Remember him. He's Leon." The call came shortly after 7 on Saturday morning, while most of the city was still asleep. Ethan was wide awake, sitting on his balcony. He hadn't been able to sleep since the audition. His body felt like a live wire, still vibrating with the phantom energy of the room where he had finally stopped being a shadow. His phone buzzed against the cold metal table. The caller ID was a number he didn't recognize. "Ethan Lu." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and unmistakably the tone of a high-level assistant. "I'm calling from the office of Jonathan Su. The director has made his decision regarding the role of Leon." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. For a moment he said nothing. It wasn't because he was afraid of the answer, but because he had spent 10 years imagining this exact moment. He needed to hear the silence of the city one last time before his world changed forever. "I'm listening," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We'd like to officially offer you the role, Mr. Liu. The director said to tell you, don't get a haircut. The war isn't over yet." Ethan closed his eyes. A small, private smile found its way onto his face. It wasn't a smile of triumph or arrogance. It was a smile of arrival. "I accept." The line went dead, and 3 seconds later, his phone exploded. It was Sophia. Her voice was vibrating with a controlled, professional triumph that she rarely allowed herself to show. "Ethan, you heard? It's official. The contract is being couriered to my office as we speak. You aren't just a guest anymore. You're the secondary lead in Shadowline." Ethan leaned his head against the cold brick wall of his apartment. "And Ryan? He's still in the cast," Sophia said, her voice turning cold and sharp. "But the power has shifted. Ryan is still in the film, but Sue has reassigned him. He'll play Leon's younger brother, the one who is arrested and broken in the second act. You're his superior on screen, Ethan. And Jonathan Sue just informed the agency that your screen time has been doubled. He's rewriting the entire third act to focus on Leon's redemption. He told the board that if they didn't like his choice, they could find a new director for their Pretty Boy movie." Ethan took a deep breath, the cold morning air filling his lungs. The industry is going to have a lot of questions. A stuntman taking a lead from the nation's sweetheart? "Let them ask," Sophia replied. "We have 10 years of medical records and rejection letters to answer them with. By the way, the Stunt Coordinators Union just sent over a massive bouquet of flowers to the office. They heard the news through the grapevine before the press release even hit. One of them wrote a note. About time someone recognized the guy who actually takes the hits." By 9 a.m., the official announcement hit the industry trades. It was a single, stark headline that acted like a grenade in a crowded room. "Ethan Liu joins Shadowline as secondary lead." Social media fractured instantly. The public, who had only known Ethan as a close friend or a lucky recommendation in the tabloids, reacted with a mixture of confusion and vitriol. Who is Ethan Liu? Isn't he just a stunt performer? Isn't he just a stunt performer? How did an unknown get cast opposite Adrian Shin? Jonathan Sue has finally lost his mind. He's casting unknowns to satisfy the underdog trend. But while the fans argued, the industry insiders, the ones who actually built the movies, reacted differently. In the catering vans and the equipment warehouses, the news was met with a quiet, reverent satisfaction. One veteran casting director who had passed over Ethan 5 times looked at the announcement and whispered to her assistant, "It's about time." The world was just slow to notice him. Sophia sat in her office, watching the notifications scroll past like a waterfall. She didn't respond to the hate. She didn't fight the trolls. She simply closed her eyes and exhaled. She had seen the truth in that audition room, and she knew that once the cameras started rolling, the public wouldn't be asking who Ethan Liu was. They would be asking why it took them 10 years to find him. 2 miles away, in a penthouse that felt like a gilded cage, Ryan Zhao saw the announcement. He didn't scream. He didn't throw his phone. He simply froze. He sat in the center of his expansive living room, surrounded by awards he had won using another man's soul, and felt a coldness that no designer coat could fix. He wasn't terrified because Ethan got a role. He was terrified because he knew the rules of the man who gave it to him. Jonathan Sue never accepted recommendations. He never bowed to agency pressure. He never cast a favor, which meant Ethan hadn't been lucky. He hadn't used a connection. He had earned it. For the first time, Ryan understood the magnitude of his mistake. He had spent 3 years trying to contain Ethan's talent, believing that if no one important saw it, it might as well not exist. Jonathan Sue had seen it. Ryan looked at the announcement again. The name Ethan Liu seemed permanent now, solid in a way Ryan could no longer erase. And for the first time, Ryan understood that Ethan had never needed him. Ryan looked at the screen again. The name Ethan Liu looked permanent, solid, unbreakable. He realized then that the person he had tried to erase had finally found a door he could not close. And for Ryan Zhao, the silence was just beginning. Back at the apartment, Ethan was packing a small bag. He didn't need much. He had his script. He had his notebook. and he had a new sense of purpose. "I'm going to need a lot of help, Sophia," Ethan said into the phone as he looked at the sunrise. "I don't know how to be a lead." "You already are one, Ethan," Sophia replied, her voice soft but certain. "You just didn't have the script yet. Get some rest. Monday morning we go to the studio. Not through the side gate. Not through the staff and stunt entrance." Ethan looked at the worn notebook on his desk, then at the new script resting beside it. He thought of every set he had entered through the staff entrance. Every morning he had disappeared behind another actor's name. "Through the front door," Ethan whispered. "Exactly," Sophia said. "Through the front door." Ethan gently closed the notebook and picked up the script. Monday would be his first day. Not as a stunt performer, not as a background actor, but as Ethan Liu. The role he had spent 10 years preparing for was finally his. And that concludes part 1. Thank you so much for listening. Ethan has finally earned his place in front of the camera, but his greatest challenges are only beginning. I'll see you in part 2.